Alright, so this video is a request, and the person sent me this picture of a part that they want to try and make, and so I want to go through, without any dimensions, because I obviously do not have that in front of me, how I would make that using Inventor. So, first off, I'd start with my rectangle tool, and I'd want to block off this basic area here. Okay, so once I have the right size, I would use my circle tool. It looks like that's about in the center, so without measuring or having any way to kind of guess how big that is, I can make a circle here. I have another one that's lined up underneath it. I'm using just my basic aligning tools to figure out how that should line up. And to me it looks like that's not quite that far away. And if I snap to this quadrant, I should be able to go straight up here and straight up from this side. It's not quite the same as just a circle on top of a circle. It has a couple of squared off edges, so I want to show that here as well. Use my trim tool, so I trim away a couple of those parts, and then actually before I trim it, I want to get that just a little bit closer. And now the lines aren't tangent, so I'm going to use my tangent constraint. And still make sure that these centers are lined up vertically. Which it looks like they adjusted a little bit. I also want them to line up vertically with the midpoint of this. And I know it's a vertical constraint because when I hover over it, it gives me that line to show me which way it's going. Sometimes this gets turned funny and use a horizontal constraint even when you're trying to line things up vertically this way. Alright, so now let's trim this part out. That's not looking too bad. On top here, you see a circle, and it's not tangent to the line, it's just, the center is just above the line. So it's going to be something kind of like this. And it almost looks like if I go ahead and draw this in here, I'll show you. So if we trim this out, it almost looks like there's a little bit of a fillet inside of here. And here's where I'm going to have to put in some kind of dimensions because apparently that's too small. I can't get through this whole thing without adding any dimensions because I don't know how big the default fillet is and that kind of stuff. So, alright, that's looking pretty close. Now, as far as these circles, how I would get those, I think I would actually use a construction line as a boundary. So, I draw a big box around it. If I highlight the box, I can right-click and make that a construction line. And now, if I use my dial caliper to measure from this to this, I can get the overall height of this box. This is the absolute max that it can be. If I measure from here to here, I can get the absolute width from this side to this side. Again, measure that with your dial caliper. I can make sure vertically that this aligns with my center point here. And that just means if this number changes to, let's say, 0.45, it'll change from both sides. Okay? And now, if I find this diameter, so whatever size circle I happen to make here, and over here, I can make tangent to the top and tangent to the side. So now I know it has to be bounded by those. I'll do the same thing with this. I know my two circles have to be equal to each other. I'll make a little circle inside of each. And I'll make those equal as well. And then I'll just trim off the stuff that I'm not using. And that should be pretty close to the solid part. So I can just extrude this little bit. I can't quite tell what's going on here, but I'm assuming there's some kind of a hole that doesn't go all the way through the part. So I can go project geometry. If I click on this, it shows me where the center point is. Then I can go back to my circle tool, make a little circle. I made the original 0.01, so I'll make this 0.005 so it cuts in halfway. I have to switch this to removing material. Make sure it actually cuts into the material and it's not trying to cut away from it. Okay, and these little notches are going to have a similar kind of thing, so I can right click, new sketch. Go over a little bit, down a little bit, and then I'm going to use my circle tool again. So I'll make something that snaps to this and tangent to that line. Make sure these edges all match up. Trim away the parts I'm not using. Make it a definite shape here. I'm going to draw a little line in between. So there's my midpoint. I can tell because it turns green. I'll make it vertical, highlight it, make that into a construction line. And then I can mirror these features across this line. Finish my sketch. When I go to extrude, I can choose to cut these. And I think that looks pretty close to what you said you needed help with. So hopefully you can figure this out. I'm assuming that this is going to be roughly centered on this. If it's not centered, let's go back to this original sketch. You can always measure how far from this edge to this edge using your calipers. And using your line tool, you can make this into a construction line. So you just highlight it, right click and make that construction. In dimension, put in the same dimension as what you found on your dial calipers. And then have this circle be tangent to this line. Okay, and you can do the same thing with the top. So right now it is constrained to the center point. So this is not going to work. If it turns out it went up higher, I could make this into another construction line. I can dimension how far down it is. I would probably end up dimensioning from this edge to this line. So I'd go from up here, or actually it'd probably be from the top of this to the inside of here. So let me delete this momentarily. And looks like I'd have to put in a point at the top of that circle. Oop. I got rid of my line. Make that into a construction line. And now you can measure the distance between those as well. Okay, so if you needed to figure out how far down, how far up, this is diameter. You shouldn't have to worry about how far left and right. It is centered horizontally. I don't know if it's centered vertically. So hopefully this helps. I feel like it's a pretty close representation of what you have. Couple little tweaks, and hopefully that gets you started.